Hello there, and welcome to the first of the Digital Foundry Q&A specials. Each week after the Direct, we'll be sitting down and answering supporter questions, and these questions will be delivered actually a few days after the Direct, so we can actually get some full feedback on what we've been discussing in the latest episode. Joining me to answer some questions, John Linneman, hi.
Hey Rich, I'm still here. I kept my camera recording all weekend while sitting in this chair waiting to record this Q&A piece, and here we are. I'm very hungry, but let's do it.
And Alex Battaglia, hello.
I have not been standing here all weekend. No, I'm just chipper, ready to go this morning. Ooh. So many questions. Ready for the first one.
Okay. Let's talk about Unreal Engine 5, because in the wake of the High on Life 2 review, lots of discussion about the state of the engine and the state of the games on the engine, specifically on consoles. We tried to sort of put a bow on that discussion in DF Direct Weekly 251, but there are still plenty more discussion points, it seems. I'm going to start with this gigantic question from Bulbous_Bow. A good morning of sorts to you all, exclamation point, appreciating you may not want to engage on this topic a second time, fair point, but discussion around High on Life 2 seems to sidestep what could have been a more interesting discussion about Unreal Engine more generally. It seems to me that poor UE5 performance is talked about as if it were part of the furniture, something to be accepted rather than critiqued. But in response to Oliver's point that on current gen consoles you can have two of the three of visual quality, features or performance, I'd say multiple engines from id Tech to Decima to RE Engine to Sony's numerous in-house engines have proven that's not necessarily the case. I would suggest the average consumer who doesn't follow DF content quite so closely as us Patreons might be coming to a game like High on Life 2 not thinking, well, it's a UE5 game, and we all know what compromises will be need to be made as a result. But more likely with a frame of reference like, I've just finished Ghost of Yotei. Why does this both look and play so much worse? Are they wrong to think that? I think the more interesting conversation here, which I appreciate might sound sacrilegious to some, is would we be better off without UE5? I say this off the back of Rich's comment that maybe like prior generations, we need to wait for the next generation of consoles to catch up with what UE is looking to do. Aside from the fact that, as I say, numerous games on other engines do prove the power is already there. Is this not an argument that on the current generation we are broadly better off with UE4 than UE5? My experience of Hogwarts Legacy, Stellar Blade, and FF7 Remake would all point in that direction. They may not push all the features, but they still look good to my eye today and, importantly, hold a rock-steady frame rate. 80 FPS at a convincingly upscaled to 4K in SB's place on PS5 Pro, thanks to the much maligned PSSR. How many of its issues seem to show up, or at least most prominently on UE5 games? Maybe a topic for another day. Certainly all are preferable to the only UE5 game I own, Black Myth Wukong, for overall performance and fidelity. And for perspective, I would like to add to the fact that for all we know, the best-selling consoles of the next generation will in fact be less powerful than the base PS5, the Switch 2, Steam Machine, and PS6 handheld. How will High on Life 2 play on them? Well, with Switch 2, we're going to find out, I guess, soonish. I think it's coming out on Switch 2. Following up on that point, Marcus says, hello, Foundryman. I really enjoyed the news segment reviewing the previous week's feedback, particularly regarding the High on Life 2 coverage. However, do you think there is a growing disconnect between the team, who often experience games on high-end PC hardware, and the average console owner? While it's easy for us with powerful rigs to appreciate ambitious tech, feels like many console players struggle to accept compromises like 720p internal resolutions or unstable frame rates, especially when the visual leap over last-gen titles like Ghost of Tsushima isn't immediately obvious to them. Additionally, John often takes a quote-unquote historian's approach, praising a game for running better than the PS3 era, which can be frustrating for users expecting a premium experience on modern hardware. Is it perhaps time for a dedicated discussion on the cost versus visual return of these newer engines to explain why these heavy trade-offs are necessary, even if the visual upgrade isn't always immediately perceptible to the general audience? Love the show. Keep up the great work. That was kind of like the podcast version of the too long didn't read thing. But I'm going to go to you first on this one, Alex, because you're kind of new to this discussion.
Right.
What do you make of this?
Well, I think I commiserate with the audience here and the questions in general. Just to get it on record, I think 720p TSR up to 1440p or 4K looks pretty dramatically bad, actually, on a 4K screen. And so I really actually do understand why the audience would say, hey, why am I putting up with a game that looks kind of fizzly and aliased and has swimming pixels all over the scene? I also kind of want to say that at those resolutions, things like the reflection portion of Lumen doesn't look good, especially in software Lumen. It just doesn't look good. So I commiserate once again with that appreciation from the console audience. But at the same time, I can also say that this isn't an engine problem, so to speak, 100%. Maybe Epic should not have built the engine as being 60 FPS ready with these features enabled without fully saying, oh, it means in a typical scenario, something like a 720p to 900p internal resolution with wonky frame rates. Maybe they should have done that, but also the developers who are making these games and using the engine should potentially maybe not be targeting 60 FPS if they want to use these features, if it means those visual trade-offs that are much maligned based upon the comments here and the comments you read under our videos. So I feel like it isn't a UE5 engine issue 100%. Rather, High on Life 2 has a 60 FPS mode, right?
Yeah.
And if it didn't have that 60 FPS mode, it wouldn't be running at 720p most likely. So yes, there's a good question in the room whether or not we need these things when we are running games at 60 FPS, but something has to push and give if we are targeting 60 FPS and the developer sees this as their vision for the game. And at that point in time, the resolution will go down to 720p and it will be a mess of swimming pixels because there's no ray reconstruction, there's no DLSS, there's no ML upscaling there. There's a limited capacity for compute. All those things make sense to me. But I do think this is a great discussion point. And I think I could, after John puts some input in it, get some input in here, I have some more to say about this. But John, since they're talking about High on Life 2, Half-Life 2, that would be interesting. Do you think your experience there with seeing the game running in its sublime PC 4K visuals has tainted your appreciation of the graphics when everyone else is in 720p land on console?
Well, yes, let me start with that, Alex, because yes, my opinion was indeed tainted by playing on a high-end PC. I am ready to admit that, and I commiserate with the users complaining about 720p footage. My experience with the console version was video clips that Oliver uploaded from his capture session, and when viewed in a window on my PC monitor, it actually looked all right. But it's true, I loaded it up on the weekend just to see what the console versions look like, and it's pretty bad. I agree. The image quality is not good at all. And it's a pretty common, unfortunate problem with Unreal Engine, which gets into what Mr. Bow was talking about. But it is true. I mean, when you're running high-end PC hardware, you do tend to want things to pushing limits and a certain level of visual quality, and you can really appreciate it there. But when you step down, even on PC, where we have to recognize as well that when we're playing on high-end PCs, we're playing on rigs that are almost borderline unobtainium for a lot of users right now. Like some of the stuff with the way prices have been going and the supply chain has been going, people can't even get this stuff right now. So that's important to think about. But so thinking about UE5 as a whole, though, and this is something I've been thinking about lately. And let me put on my historian cap again, because I think throughout every console generation, you always have games that push technical limits and do so at a very smooth level of performance with good results. And you've always had games and developers that fall short, right? This is normal. It's just a question of where they fall short, right? Like I've always said, the PlayStation 2 was it was a land of 60 FPS. And a lot of games did it, but you still had games that ran really poorly, like Killzone 1. Guerrilla has turned things around, but at the time, Killzone 1 is like a 15 FPS game most of the time. It looks nice, but it's horrible to play. It runs so poorly. That's a case of them doing things wrong. They made choices that are not good, and the game doesn't run well during a generation where 60 was common. Unreal Engine has always been this way. It was already clear back then, but like when you look at the UE3 generation, developers had to make a lot of sacrifices there as well. UE4, same deal. And with UE5, it seems we've entered a new generation of this. And this is not to hand wave it away. It's to note that players have largely grown to expect 60 frames per second, which is good. But with the way that UE5 works, you basically kind of have to pick and choose unless you have a very talented tech team. And by that, I mean, you can have your image quality, your frame rate, or your visual quality. And the use of features such as Lumen and Nanite, right? Having all three of these on a console right now seems to be almost impossible. I don't believe it's impossible. I actually think when the coalition finally shows what they've been doing, we'll actually see that it can be done. But that's, of course, the point. It's like the best examples in games tend to come from very well-funded large studios that are either very plugged into Unreal Engine at its core, or they've rolled their own tech. So when you name those games, especially first-party games running their own tech, yeah, those developers very specifically are able to tailor those experiences to look and run as best as they can while pushing features in just the right way. It's the same with like id Tech and everything, right? Like everybody knows id Software. They're very, very renowned for their work, and they've continued to show it off with full ray traced games running on consoles with pretty darn good image quality at high frame rates. But not every developer has that talent, which is where it's not even just about talent, by the way. I shouldn't say that. There's a lot of talented people working at all these studios. It's more like budget, time, and know-how. There is definitely a difference in skill level, but you can only like attracting the best people, having the budget to pay them, being able to roll all this stuff. It's very, very difficult. So there's an alternative. Use Unreal Engine more conservatively. And this kind of ties into a video that I'm thinking about doing if I have time here. I played all the way through Reanimal this weekend, and I walked away thinking this is an incredibly beautiful game. This is one of the coolest looking games I've seen in a long time. I absolutely love the visual design. It's Unreal Engine. It's good image quality, great image quality even on the consoles. It runs at 60 frames per second the whole time on PS5 Pro. Everything about the presentation was just superlative, and it doesn't use Lumen or Nanite. I think Lumen and Nanite are awesome features, but in this case, this shows a developer that very specifically, they crafted a very specific and beautiful art style, and they went all in on it, and they determined like they don't really need real-time GI or anything here because it is a static game world, right? With these fixed camera angles. So they're like, okay, we don't need this. They didn't really need Nanite either due to the way the world is set up in the cameras. Like the camera doesn't need to be worrying about law details being drawn in just due to how that works. Yet you still get something that looks phenomenal and runs really smooth. So it shows you can have everything to a degree, but they took a more conservative approach. And so I think it just gets back to which features you can get all at once. And I think this maybe starts to tie into some of like the long-term promises you get from with a new Unreal Engine where you got all these cool new features and it's all promised to be like, oh, it's so easy, you get this, you get that. But when it comes to actually implementing all of it and making it performant, it is not so easy. And if you've stepped into this world and you're leveraging everything UE has to offer, it's really difficult to get the level of performance you might want. And so I think Lumen and Nanite are good things. They're advancing things forward, but I also think like developers just using VSM's Lumen and Nanite because it's the new stuff and then building their vision around that. But then maybe the art side doesn't hold up its end of the bargain either. I actually think High on Life 2 is one of the best looking UE5 games, to be honest. But a lot of these games you look at and you're like, if you didn't have Lumen here, for instance, yeah, you would see edge cases where the lighting's not as good, but I still think, maybe baked lighting could be good in a game that's a completely static kind of world. Like I play in Romeo as a Dead Man. Like I think that game looks nice. It's an interesting visual style. I think it would have been better off if they didn't use Lumen and just baked out the lighting, which again, more difficult from a development standpoint, but like you'd still get results that look good. It would be more visually stable and it would be higher res. That's a point where you want to pick the technique that fits your project. You don't always need these technologies. But there are games like maybe something like Avowed or something, which, talking about the PS5 version coming up, where, yeah, those technologies actually generally benefit the type of experience they've made due to the dynamic time of day system, the vast variety of environments, and all the little nooks and crannies that you can explore in first person. That's where you might want it. So I don't know. Does that make sense, guys? Like, I'm just kind of
I think
throwing out a lot of info there, but that's kind of where my thinking is right now.
Yes, there is a lot of info there. I think ultimately Unreal Engine, whether it's any of them, basically is a tool that developers need to use, but it always comes down to the fact that you've got specific GPU and CPU time budgets, right? Mm-hmm. And using Lumen and Nanite and virtual shadow maps, obviously eats into the amount of GPU and CPU time you've got available. I did actually have a go on this game on High on Life 2 on the Ryzen 5 3600 with a 4060. Yes, Oliver was speculating that there are CPU limits on streaming in the background, streaming environments. That's definitely the case with the Ryzen 5 3600, more so than the consoles, I would say. And yes, even with DLSS, upscaling 720p to 1440p is not attractive, but you kind of need to do that with a 4060. I think also that on the 4060, there's memory limitations there. I had to actually shift to a 4060 Ti. To get to high settings, which is kind of where you want to be on Unreal Engine with a few tweaks. So yeah, I mean, it's a demanding game is the bottom line, and they made that demanding game knowing the limits of the consoles, and they decided to make those trades. That's the bottom line. What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, I think those trade-offs are made at the developer, and I think it's good for consumers, and I do think ourselves, to be more critical if we think the 720p looks like garbo. Like, I do think we should be a bit like on PC. I'll often reference when I'm using the 4060. I'll say I don't want to scale from this res because I don't think it looks good or something like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or I'll say, in this case, we trade resolution for features, etc. As part of optimized settings, or just in general. Like recently with Neo 3, I said, we're making so many trade-offs in resolution, we can't be doing this. So I think it's important for users to give feedback and for us to give feedback. And one aspect of this that I do want to take a little bit of contention with is that everyone referencing Ghost of Tsushima or Ghost of Yotei, or here we see Hogwarts Legacy, Stellar Blade, Final Fantasy VII Remake. I think I don't know if people just don't have the eyes for this thing sometimes, but I do think there is a bit of an ignoring of the more painful visual or performance faults of some games occasionally, just because, we like the game. High on Life 2, I don't think is going to be a chart lighter upper in comparison to something like a AAA Ghost of Tsushima. But, Hogwarts Legacy, that game has so many technical issues on a lot of platforms. I don't think it is a very good performer, actually. Final Fantasy VII Remake performs very well, but we can at least very easily point out its visual faults. And I think we've done that over a variety of reviews. We like the initial section of the game, right? But then you get to the second section of that town area, that Rustville town area, and we immediately see some of the issues popping out. Stellar Blade, I would say there's a conservatism there to some of its visual quality at points, in spite of having generally pretty good performance, right? I think there is a push and a pull here for how conservative you can be with visuals on a fixed platform. And I think we have to be honest about all those things, for good and for bad. And unfortunately for Bulbous Bow, or Bulbous Bow, however they pronounce the second part of that name, Black Myth Wukong is one of the worst UE5 titles on console due to a very bizarre setup of how they chose to do resolution and performance in that game. I would not use that as a candidate for UE5 performance representation on console, to be honest with you. There are other titles that are better representative of how it is typically used on console.
I think some of the comparisons to games with engines literally designed for that game I get where the comparison is coming from. We saw it with Death Stranding 2, for example. There are examples where the game is so closely tied to the technology in a way that you just can't really do with Unreal Engine 5, unless you're somebody like the Coalition who's willing to spend years upon years customizing the engine, working in tandem directly with Epic. Those are kind of like, luxuries of sorts. But at the same time, again, it all comes down to assessing what this technology is capable of, figuring out where the bottlenecks are, and figuring out whether you want to use those technologies or not. I mean, Arc Raiders is the classic example, right? And in terms of like, going back, we're better off with the UE4 than UE5. Well, you can just turn off the UE5 features and you are essentially going back to the UE4 feature set in many ways. I suspect,
but with way better perf.
Yeah, better performance.
So, yeah, that's probably not the best argument.
I'm wondering, Rich, I just had an idea thinking about these like custom engines and stuff. Like what would it take for a developer to pull off Forza Horizon 5 or 6 on Unreal Engine at that performance?
Right. I don't know if it's possible, to be honest with you.
Like that, I wonder about that, because you see that engine's very specifically designed for that. But I'm like, man, could you even do Forza Horizon with like that level of performance and visual quality in Unreal Engine right now?
I honestly don't think so.
I think, to put a bow on this particular discussion, we tell you what the game is like, and you could either accept our interpretation of those results, or you can have your own. And ultimately, if you don't like it, don't buy it. I think that's pretty much the purpose of a review.
I think in the circling back to High on Life 2, I mean, this is definitely a case where they should have had a quality mode. Most games do have quality modes, maybe a 40 FPS mode even, but by only doing performance mode, it does mean that everybody has to work with this low resolution mode, even if because I want 60, but not everybody doesn't necessarily need 60. They could, and you know what, we know from history of shooters, like people can still have fun at 30 FPS. I don't like that, and I think it's moving backwards, but I still think it should be provided.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I think
also on top of that, just do VRR properly, guys. Come on. Especially
that's very important.
On Xbox, at least it's simple, but on PS5, like it's not that difficult to implement this. Just freaking do it, guys. Like, geez, like most people are using VR capable TVs these days. They just are. Like, just do it correctly.
There has been a push from Sony internally, specifically for power saver mode, which may well translate across to the handheld, that they really do want you to use the VRR functionality they're providing. It's unfortunate that it's not at the system level, and that the developer actually has to use the actual SDK to do it, but it is what it is.
At the very least, they got to understand, like, forcing 120 hertz is key. Right?
Yeah.
Like if you're just doing 60 hertz output, it's just not going to work, right? And it doesn't on Xbox either. Like that's just how it is. You need that 120 to use low frame rate compensation.
Yeah. Let's move on. We got this sort of an adjacent question to that from Matt GPT. A question based on the YouTube comments for a few recent videos. Why do so many people seem to mistake YouTube compression / quality issues for issues in the game itself? I know you use slow motion clips, zoomed in sections, and lots of different tricks to try and mitigate and explain the positives and negatives of a game's presentation versus YouTube issues. But is there a way to help people understand the impact of watching a video on YouTube, what the impact of watching a video on YouTube has on the content? So this kind of does relate to High on Life 2 to a certain extent, because it's a fast moving game. It uses a lot of lots of different colors. Fast motion, lots of different colors is bad news for YouTube compression. It just doesn't really hold up. But you've got to show the game running in real time for a lot of the duration, otherwise it will just look weird. And you kind of have to really slow certain footage down. I remember back in the day we just did pure comparison videos, and we would actually choose the amount of slowing down factor, up to like a quarter or even an eighth. speed just to be able to retain the quality with very, very limited bandwidth. And that's the other thing, of course, a point that Oliver came up with the other week on DF Direct, which is that you can actually, even if the footage looks fine, you put it side by side, high-end PC with consoles, and unless you've got like game-changing effects like past tracing or something, or massive reductions in, density of, say, foliage or detail, they'll look very, very similar, but they won't in real life. What do you make? What do you make of this, John?
Oh man, this is something we've wrangled with for years, right? And I think we've done a lot to try to cement it. And this actually ties into the whole purpose of slow-mo shots and zoom-ins that we've had is specifically a solution to try to rectify this, because just watching normal full-screen footage on YouTube does not represent what you see when playing on your console. It just does not. There's too many artifacts as a result. And also, people watch on different size screens. If you're watching on a phone, for instance, the differences suddenly become almost invisible, impossible to see. And if you don't do those types of techniques, you won't be able to see it at all. And you're not going to play the game on your phone, most likely. So it's not really representative of anything either. So like taking into account all these different screens and trying all these different techniques is really important. But even then, when you've done everything you can to explain it, there's only so much you can do before it starts to impede on the pacing of a video. So like we can't necessarily educate everyone in the sense, like if somebody's just randomly coming to a video, we can't assume that they all know everything about why things are being shown the way they are, right? But if we tried to explain it every time, it would be really boring. Because then it's like, oh, here, let's go through this again. And this wouldn't necessarily solve it, but like I'm just thinking, what if we had some kind of a primer on the website, or even a video that we could link back to, something to sort of try to explain these issues in depth, show certain techniques used to mitigate it, just something to like clue audiences in that they can point to and be like, oh, okay, this is why.
Yeah, because I think ultimately we've got to accept the limitations of the platform, though, and the problem with doing explainers is they disappear into the past.
That's true.
And
well, unfortunately, I think this is just a problem that everyone is dealing with YouTube, and I think game publishers in particular face it every day. I think we're doing as good of a job as possible within YouTube, as in encoding in the right formats. Our footage, I think, looks pretty good on there, better than a lot. But then game publishers are still uploading stuff at like 1080p 30 or just 4K 30 even, or like their bit rates are messed up. And like when I see a new trailer go up and it's 1080p flat with not even at 60, I'm just like, what are you guys even doing? Like, who okayed this?
Yeah.
Alex,
it just tears apart the footage. It's nearly unwatchable. If you pause during any action scene, it's just a sea of blur and pixels.
Alex, we've got an issue at the moment where we can't actually show PC games the way they're likely to be experienced. Because basically, pretty much every monitor these days ships with VRR. You'd be a nut not to be using VRR in your gaming. So we're kind of still using VSync in a world where the only reason we're using it is because it looks good on YouTube. And so that's been sort of presenting some challenges in how we show certain information. But it just highlights, the fact that YouTube is kind of like lowest common denominator stuff in many ways, certainly when it comes to like variable refresh and stuff like that. And the fact that it is fundamentally bandwidth bound, which will have an impact on quality.
Yeah, so this is something that we're going to work on over the next couple of weeks. There's going to be a variety of games releasing on PC, and I think it would be a good test case opportunity to switch to a different workflow for at least certain aspects of our recording to be more representative of the audience. And so that'll be coming about in the future. But in the meantime, I think one thing to educate the audience would be maybe even in just a random video or a DF clip where we show a still from our high quality footage versus a still, and this will resolve over YouTube, versus a still of a screenshot from a YouTube version of that same footage.
Right.
And we could show them, I will show them, I think, one of the worst case examples, because it has sharpening and foliage, and that's Horizon Forbidden West. Horizon Forbidden West walking forward with motion blur off or something like that. Game just looks like garbo soup on YouTube, I think. and in super high quality footage that we're getting locally, it's going to look more or less like the real deal on your screen. And we could really easily show off there how poor it is at a normal, 60 FPS tick. And I think that would get the point across in a DF clip or something like that. Maybe it's something just to really briefly prepare for DF Direct next week or something like that. But even via legacy footage. And I think that would show the audience just what the struggle is and why you would want to slow down footage to make sure that you're getting as much bit rate per frame as possible and is getting many B frames applying to the current frame versus, intermediate footage. So I think that's all stuff that we can talk about maybe in one tiny little video. We haven't talked about it in a while, and I'm happy that MattGPT's questions come up here because it does explain a lot why our videos look a lot like I get off. I'll tell people I make videos that are on YouTube, and they always think I'm like a streamer or something like that. And the quality of like streamed video and just like the random erratic mouse movement, that stuff looks so bad. We have a very different style of video to all that, and our production style is very different. And I think because we are focusing so heavily on the quality of the footage, and that's also why, even though I'm a mouse and keyboard player for a game, I will use a controller to get footage that is more steady per frame.
Yep.
It's not because I prefer it. I absolutely do not. Ask anyone.
Okay.
But for the video, it's got to be
Ask
done.
anyone. I'll just pop out in the street.
Yeah.
Alex Battaglia.
Alex, tell me about your controller experience.
Okay, let's move on. Got a question here from Paul Arbaquina. Hey DF crew, exclamation point. I've been thinking recently that I don't see the purpose of buying a laptop for gaming these days. Granted that I haven't had one in over a decade, but with the rise of gaming handhelds, I can't see myself recommending buying a laptop. For portable gaming, I'd use my Steam Deck or a Switch 2 if you prefer that. And if I want something more powerful to play graphically intensive games, a PS5 or desktop PC is a far better choice. What is the purpose of a laptop for gaming in the year of our Lord 2026? Thoughts? I'm going to sort of quickly step into this. I hate to break it to you, Paul, but the rise in PC gaming, a lot of it is being driven by laptop purchases. And they've sold a huge amount of gaming laptops with Nvidia GPUs, a huge amount. And it's only sort of gaining momentum. And I think the reason why is certainly for younger users, they might not have the space to have like a full gaming PC. We'll talk about the portable stuff in a second. And the other thing, of course, is that you kind of want an all-in-one device that can do a bunch of stuff, and you can't really do that on a portable, on a gaming sort of portable. I also find that, what can I say? When you get older, it starts to get really difficult to look at stuff close to you. And for that reason, it's very difficult, although I love gaming handhelds and stuff as a concept. It's really difficult for me to actually use them without changing my glasses for like specific glasses. It's a bit unwieldy, but ultimately I think it's like a whole generation of gamers are coming up from their teenage years. They're going to college. They need a laptop for college work. They also want to game. They may not have a lot of space. So it serves a purpose there. And I also think, up until the arrival of Panther Lake, that the quality level of the gaming experience on a portable versus a laptop is actually quite stark. And obviously with laptops, you get these like quite deluxe screens these days. OLED screens are quite commonplace now on laptops. Not so much on handhelds. What do you make of this, Alex?
For the longest period of time, I would always disrecommend people from using laptops when they were looking to start to get into PC gaming, mainly for the monetary divide that was there. They were looking for the ease and portability and stuff that they could use for other things when they go out and about, take notes at a lecture or somewhat. And I would always advise against it. But that was in the time when things were... the affordability of getting your own parts was a different proposition than it is now in memory apocalypse times. So now I'm actually less against it than I've ever been before. Weird as that is. And I actually think it could end up being a viable way to get a screen, a processor, a GPU with separate dedicated VRAM in a way that is semi-affordable. I don't think you necessarily need to go into the ultra core gamer laptop region there that, you see like the mobile 5090s, though that's still an extremely expensive proposition.
Yep.
That is not meant for everyone. But I think the mid-tier to low-tier light gaming experience can actually be well serviced by a laptop these days. The only issue is, once again, finding one with, I think, a proper level amount of VRAM, and that I'd still say is somewhat of a concern, because the GPUs they have out, the mobile GPU versions, do not line up with the desktop variants.
Yeah.
And I've seen very strange mobile RTX GPUs where I had to ask, "That's real?" I didn't realize it until after the fact. So if you're going to be going into the portable space with a laptop, I do recommend at least getting a laptop GPU, if wholly possible. I really hope it is, that has more than 8 gigs of VRAM.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting point you raised there, Alex. But also thinking about the pricing side of things, the ROG Xbox LIX $1,000 unit there. And, Black Friday last year, there were like entire laptops with 4050s, 4060s at about the same level. I kind of know which one I'd rather have from a gaming quality perspective.
I think I know too. So yeah.
You actually spent some time with a 5090 laptop recently, John. And you loved it.
It's fundamentally completely different than a gaming handheld, right? It's essentially a desktop replacement. It's a PC that's powerful that you can use anywhere. Or on any surface anyway, right? And when you're playing on a gaming laptop, you're playing with a mouse and a keyboard, right? Rather than just like on a small screen with a gamepad, essentially. So it's just fundamentally a different experience there. Not everybody wants their PC gaming to be done with like a device that they have to hold up in their hands near their face with a small screen and gamepad controls. I think that's really cool. It's a fun way to play, but it's different. Whereas a gaming laptop allows you to play as you would on a desktop PC. Mouse and keyboard, or gamepad if you want, and you had a much larger screen. It's usually much more fully featured and way, 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 way more powerful hardware options. Okay. And, considering the cost of some of the high-end handheld PCs, it's not that much more to step up to a laptop. And given that gaming laptops today can be really, really slim and light as well, which is quite outstanding. And the battery life is fine on them now when you're not gaming, right?
Yeah.
So like gaming laptops have become something that I think can be used as a regular laptop very comfortably without being like ridiculous looking or like too oversized. Like I mean, back in the day, I still love it. My old NP 9860 from Sager, which was a Clevo D900T based laptop from 2004, which had the desktop Pentium 4 3.6 gigahertz in it, had a modular GPU, so like the high-end Nvidia mobile GPU of the time, but it was modular. You could actually replace it with a different GPU. Had 2 optical drive slots, RAID 0 for hard drives in there. It had 7 fans, and it weighed an absolute ton, and it was so thick. It was an amazing machine, but it was gigantic. We're a long way from those days.
Yeah, I remember looking at a GTX 980M laptop that from ASUS, and you could plug it into a water-cooled base station, so you could actually run it at decent clocks. That's kind of nutty.
What was that? Was it an Acer? Acer did this one that had a curved screen, if I recall. It like came in like a giant like flight case when you bought it.
I don't remember
that one, but it sounds like something.
I love the diversity though, that's for sure. And I think the bottom line is that people have different uses for different devices. And yeah, sorry, Paul, there's a lot of people buying.
Oh yeah, it was the Acer Predator 21X. Which is the most ridiculous looking laptop. Like, my goodness, this laptop. It is. It's a giant, like, it's a 21-inch curved screen on a laptop.
Wow, that's crazy. I mean, I remember Dell used to do an XPS that was basically mobile parts that sort of disassembled into an all-in-one PC. That had
that's cool, actually.
Detachable keyboard and stuff like that. Yeah, crazy stuff. Let's move on. Potato Gamer asks, "Hi DF crew, as someone who's never played a Kojima game, do you recommend to jump in with Death Stranding 2 for PC, or would you consider its predecessor a prerequisite? Cheers! Exclamation point, John."
Oh man, that's actually a trick. That's actually a tricky one because I love Death Stranding 1 and I like 2 even more. But the gap between them, that experience was very important because these are not super short games and there is a lot of walking, to be fair, which is part of the experience. But like, I feel like trying to play Death Stranding 1 and 2 back to back could potentially lead to just being like, an overabundance of Death Stranding to the point where you might not enjoy the second one as much. I think you can technically enjoy Death Stranding 2 without having played 1. I do think you will lose some of the impact, perhaps, for sure. Man, the thing is, though, is Death Stranding 1 is a bit more pure of an experience. It's very isolated, very, it's like a lonely, dark place. And it has a really interesting way of telling the story. It's very subtle and interesting. The second one is far more bombastic, more colorful. It still has mood, but it's different, right?
They're not
So
basic things here, like, who the hell are these guys? Who
yeah,
shooting me.
you'll be like, exactly. It's like, who are these? So while you could get by with it, I mean, man, that's a really tricky one. Just think about what you're looking for. I mean, at the very least, if you're gonna go straight to 2, watch like a proper recap of Death Stranding 1 before that.
right?
But honestly, if you have the time, I would play Death Stranding 1 and then maybe wait a bit and then play 2.
Wait a bit, what, just to recharge?
Wait 3 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're somebody that mows through a 50-hour game in like less than a week or something. I don't know.
Do they do anything in Death Stranding 2 to facilitate like a more welcoming experience for those who didn't play the first one, or are you just straight in there?
No, I believe they do actually have. It's been a while since I checked on that, but I think they do have a thing that sort of fills you in on what happened in the original.
Right. Okay.
So they do try to ease you into it. But yeah, I mean, opening with like Norman Reedus holding a baby overlooking a giant like mountain range, you'd be like, But then again, the whole Death Stranding experience can be summed up as I think that happens a lot while playing it, which is part of the fun,
Okay, let's move on to this question from Ib12. Good day from Canada, my digital foundvians. What's your opinion on Nvidia's forthcoming CPU, as well as abandonment of the consumer GPU market this year? No RTX 60 series for the more lucrative AI one. Also, it's sad they're turning their backs on the gamers who got them where they are today, from the Sega Saturn NV2 quad disaster especially, although still a fave console of mine for the games, of course. Well, that's an interesting perspective on this. I think it's fair to say that if there aren't going to be any consumer GPUs this year, it's probably down to the memory crisis, because ultimately there were a series of highly well-sourced leaks on what the RTX 50 series Super was going to be, and it was essentially tweaks to the existing lineup with more memory. And more memory isn't possible in the current climate. So I don't think there was ever going to be an RTX 60 series this year. But it does look as though 50 series Super was cancelled, and I think the circumstances behind that are probably quite extraordinary and not entirely down to Nvidia. So yeah. The forthcoming CPU, I'm not aware of a CPU. I am aware of the NX1, which is going to be a consumer-facing laptop part with an Nvidia Blackwell GPU. So I guess
wasn't NX1 Switch 1?
I'm pretty sure it is N1X actually, or something like that. N1X.
Yeah.
I'll have to Google it just quickly. But that is the fact that they are going to be producing this new SoC for laptops, for gaming laptops. Sorry, Paul. And I'm quite excited by it. Because, the chance for Nvidia to get into the gaming laptop space with a fully contained device that's super, super efficient, I think that's going to be quite exciting. It also opens the door to doing interesting stuff like, what about a Steam machine type ultra small box? That would be pretty cool, right? What about a new Nvidia Shield? I'd be quite interested in that. And there is quite a lot going on there. But in terms of new consumer level graphics cards, apart from these special edition 5090s that are going for like super high amounts of money, that's, doesn't seem to be a thing. This concept of turning their back on gamers, though, if Nvidia are turning their back on gamers, surely everybody else is as well. Where's the Intel B770? What about more RDNA 4 GPUs? Or if you're expecting RTX 60 series this year, why aren't we seeing RDNA 5? Very, very similar reasons. It's just the market, the market that we've got. We've kind of all been lumbered with it. It's not just Nvidia. I said, I think the other thing to bear in mind, of course, is that Nvidia is still rolling out stuff like DLSS 4.5. You've got dynamic multi-frame generation coming along. Is this the behavior of a company that's turning its back on gamers? Hardware, consumer level GPU hardware, yeah, that's definitely a thing, but it's a thing for everyone. I don't know what you make about all of this, Alex.
Yeah, regarding the CPU, I'll just echo Rich's, and I've said this over multiple DF Directs before, that I'm excited to see a new non-x86 processor enter the Windows sphere and even non-Windows sphere, just to see actually where the bottleneck lies in the real-time translation of software to actually, run x86 code on ARM, and it's not attached to just one single manufacturer, so we can actually see where the bottlenecks are. I'm very curious when that'll come out for what the benchmarking shows off. Regarding the current GPU situation, every single company, like Rich said, is also in the exact same boat here. Arguably, maybe due to them having the largest probably requirement for manufacturing, maybe Nvidia is possibly better off than everyone else that in this situation here, because they have the most GPUs being sold. Therefore, they had a larger backstock before this started, so that they had essentially a more gradual tail there to the rising of prices, potentially. So everyone's in this position. It's just a really bad time to buy a GPU for yourself at the moment. Most GPUs, especially in the United States. And historically, the NV2 disaster, NV2 quad disaster is funny to talk about now. But, gamers who got them to where they were today is an interesting thing to say, because, NV1, NV2, meh, not not the direction the industry was going to go in. But then you get to like TNT 2 roughly, and I will say it's a great GPU or a great graphics accelerator for the time period. And I think the reason why people started buying them, beyond the fact that I think Nvidia made some deals with pre-built manufacturers at the time to make sure that the TNT2 was being added into systems, but it was also actually a good rival at that point in time to 3DFX's dominance. And then after that, it was even more obvious when you got to things like Voodoo 3, comparing it to the NVIDIA alternative at the time. And it was more like, which one do you want more? Voodoo 3 was actually a great GPU, of course, but you could also get an alternative in a world where not every big 3D game only had a glide renderer. So I think there's a little bit more historical discussion there that could be had about whether or not it was gamers who saved NVIDIA or if they actually made a good product at that time.
Yeah. Any thoughts, John?
Oh man, that's an interesting one. I do feel like when looking at like no new consumer products being like a bad thing, I would say like, what do we need them for right now? Right? Like, I think we're at a point where actually like games are taking a long time to make. They're still often defined by consoles. PC hardware out there today is largely way more powerful than those consoles. Anyway, and the bottlenecks on games is very rarely the GPU anyway, at this point, I would say. It feels like to me anyway. I mean, provided you have one of the more powerful GPUs at least. I don't know. I feel like taking a pause is not a bad thing for this. Now, the reason for it is probably more driven by RAM cost and all that, which is not good and will influence many other things. But I feel like not having new GPUs this year isn't actually a bad thing at all. And, I would have normally said, hey, prices could come down, but unfortunately, that's not going to happen either. But
Yeah.
I don't know. We're just kind of in an interesting pattern where I think like what we have on the GPU side right now is perfectly adequate and quite powerful as is.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is that there are issues with larger capacity NVIDIA GPUs, the 16 gig ones. But it does seem to be market related. UK, it's still really quite easy to buy the 5070 Ti. There's a slight markup. It's about £130 based on what I'm looking at here to get a 5070 Ti, which isn't great. But the point is that you can buy them. I'm looking at the 5070 here. It seems to be slightly higher than MSRP. And that's, it seems to be like things are kind of stable at the moment in terms of pricing. I mean, that could be a comment that comes back to haunt me, but the ultra high end stuff, the 5090, 5080 seems to be attracting price premiums at the moment. All of that is not great. But again, we seem to be kind of insulated to it compared to other markets in the UK. I mean, there was on a bargain site the other day, your favorite store, Carrie's Digital.
Yes.
Carrie's Digital PC World. I love it. They were doing the 5080, not an Nvidia one, by the way. They were doing a 5080 at MSRP, which is kind of unheard of at this time. But it just seemed to be a case that the market is taking over to a certain extent on pricing. But at least the kind of more mainstream parts, 5070, don't seem to be that affected. 16 gig 5060 Ti, well, that's looking a bit unfortunate. You say, turning their back on gamers though, that's a really sort of emotional take, I think. We've lost the 50 series Super, which had more memory. I think that's the bottom line. We're still seeing stuff like multi-frame generation coming along, dynamic multi-frame generation, which I'm really looking forward to. So there are new things happening in the graphics space. It's just not consumer level GPUs. Now, if the RTX 60 series is like prolonged beyond 2027, I'd start to worry about that. I guess we'll just need to see how this memory crisis continues. But for now, at least, if you want like a reasonable graphics card, you can buy one, and it's still relatively affordable. And to my point, the 5070 is delivering results that outstrip what a PS5 Pro can do for about £550. That's not a terrible deal. Let's move on. We got this question here from James Kelly Chambers. It's nice to see Metal Gear Solid 4 finally escaping PS3 jail. If you could wave a magic wand to rescue any other game currently trapped on older hardware, which one are you picking? Which one are you picking, John?
Oh man, I guess the first ones that spring to mind would be on the racing game side, MotorStorm series, whether bringing them back properly or a brand new entry, and Project Gotham Racing series. And I might also toss in a Killzone 2 or something, just because it's such a cool looking game, and it remains forever locked to PlayStation 2 or PlayStation 3. And RPCS 3 handles these things fairly well, but not perfectly. And and of course Project Gotham as well. I've had bad luck with Xenia running those super well. So, man, I would love to see those games come back in that style. It would be really cool.
What do you think, Alex? I mean, you're in an enviable position because games escaping the PC jail.
Well, for me, I think there's a history of some poor ports to PC. I was actually just thinking
PC jail.
Of Jet Set Radio.
Right.
I think that game's locked to 30 FPS on PC. I would love to see it
on
reported to be a variable or ultra high frame rate experience.
Right.
It's it's like a super arcadey game, and it's 30 FPS. It just seems so wrong. And a non-PC game that I like, but it's stuck on N64 jail more or less, and has a bunch of quirks from the N64 is. Well, actually, there's a lot of the Rare catalog I think is stuck on the N64 that I like, but I really like Jet Force Gemini. and the game is like 0 FPS on N64, and it has its control interface is all about like switching between shooting and aiming and it reverses in the y-axis inversion when you hit the button to aim. It is really confusing to use on a N64 controller. I think it always confused me, and it seems like it would be perfect for a modern dual stick and or keyboard and mouse scheme. And yet, you've got your rare replay, but I don't think that is enough for a game that is that cool. So I'm really looking forward to the eventuality of that game, along with Wave Race 64, getting a PC recomp or decomp to actually shore things up, because those games I think are really cool. I think things like Blast Core are just awesome games. There's a lot of N64 games that I think if we went back and played them without the lens of them being at like 20 FPS, we would be like, wow, what a game. But we're not there yet.
I think basically from my perspective, anything on PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360 that is locked to those platforms, I mean, that's kind of like a bit of a golden generation for me. I do think they deserve to be liberated from those particular hardware consoles, because in a lot of cases the performance wasn't great. Looking forward to seeing what Metal Gear Solid 4 is going to end up looking like, because man, I'm kind of wondering how the port was done, and the extent to which the SPU usage may have made that more challenging. And of course, there were rumors back in the day that there was at least the beginnings of an Xbox 360 port for that game. As to whether that work may have been useful or not, who knows? There's a lot going on there. I mean, when you look at the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 1, you can see there was existing work that they could draw from to do those ports, right?
Yes.
Yep.
But with this, nothing, as far as we're aware, right? Maybe that's something we should approach Konami about. How did you do this? That would be great hashtag content.
Great story.
Okay.
Weren't you just saying, Rich, though, another game that's really locked down, I think you wanted to see get a modern version, is WarioWare Shove It Up Your Own Ass game?
I remember this one.
Yeah.
Shove it up, yes.
Definitely. Let's not go there, John. Okay, that was the final question there for the end of the show. We'll be back with TF Direct Weekly 252 coming soon. But that's all from us for now. Thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry, and I guess we'll see you soon.